92 years old. That is not a boast, it is a confession. When you live this long, you begin to see your life not as a story, but as a series of postponed conversations. Things you meant to say, places you meant to go, hands you meant to hold a little tighter. I used to believe time was generous, stretchable, patient. I believed that if something mattered, I would get to it. That love especially could wait its turn. It cannot. At 92, I wake up in a smaller world. The house is quieter, the phone rings less, the mirror shows a woman I do not recognize, and yet I know her regrets by heart. I have buried my husband, Harold. I have buried my younger brother, Thomas. I have stood at gravesides with my children gripping my elbows as if I were the fragile one. I have watched friends disappear one by one until Christmas cards stopped coming altogether. No one tells you that the hardest part of aging is not your knees or your eyesight. It is memory. Memory arrives uninvited. It brings with it the moments you rushed through, the arguments you left unresolved, the not now that became never. If you are in your 50s or 60s, you probably feel steady, capable, still in control of your days. You think your real reckoning is decades away. I thought that too. I thought retirement would be a gentle slope. I thought Harold and I would sit on our back porch into our 80s, complaining about politics and the neighbor's dog. I thought my children would always have time to visit next month. I was wrong. This is not advice from someone who mastered life. This is a warning from someone who misunderstood it. There are 10 lessons I learned far too late. None of them are complicated. That is what makes them dangerous. They sound simple until they are no longer possible. And the first lesson began the day I lost something small and didn't realize it was the beginning of everything. The first loss never feels permanent. I was 27 when my mother died. Her name was Eleanor. She baked peach pies from scratch and hummed while folding laundry. I assumed she would always be there, at the end of a phone call, at the corner of a holiday table. She called me 3 days before her stroke. I was busy. Daniel, my oldest, had a fever. The laundry wasn't done. Harold was working overtime at the steel plant. I remember glancing at the clock while she talked about her garden. "Not now, Mama," I said gently. "Can I call you Sunday?" Sunday never came for her. When I stood in the hospital room staring at the machines breathing for her, I realized something I had never considered. Conversations expire. At her funeral, people said she'd lived a full life, 58 years old. I nodded like that meant something comforting. I told myself I would do better with the next call, the next visit, the next goodbye. Grief makes promises on your behalf. In my 30s and 40s, life filled up fast. 2 more children, Rebecca and Michael, soccer practices, parent-teacher conferences, mortgage payments, promotions at work. I became efficient at postponing tenderness. Next weekend, after this busy season, when things calm down. Things do not calm down. They only rearrange themselves. My father grew quieter after my mother passed. I noticed it, but I did not lean into it. I assumed men of his generation preferred silence. When he invited us for Sunday dinner, I sometimes declined. Gas was expensive. The kids were tired. He died at 72, a heart attack in his sleep. I remember standing in his kitchen afterward, opening his refrigerator for no reason. There was leftover soup in a container labeled in his careful handwriting. I had missed the last Sunday dinner he ever cooked. I began to understand that love is not measured by intention, it is measured by attendance. But even then, I did not fully absorb the lesson. I mourned, I cried. I promised myself I would be more present. And then life resumed its noise. Have you ever told yourself, "I'll visit when things slow down"? When did they? Harold and I were still young enough to believe we were different, that our losses were isolated events, that tragedy happened in chapters, not in patterns. We were wrong, because the next loss would not be apparent. It would be something inside our own home. And this time, I would see it happening, and still choose later. Regret rarely arrives with alarms. It slips in quietly, disguised as responsibility. By the time I was in my late 50s, our children were adults. Daniel moved to Chicago. Rebecca married a man named Scott and settled in Ohio. Michael struggled, drifting between jobs, unsure of himself. Harold and I talked often about helping him more, really listening, sitting down without judgment. Not tonight, I would say. He needs to figure things out. I confused distance with strength. One evening, Michael came over unannounced. He looked tired, not physically, deeper than that. We sat at the kitchen table. He stirred his coffee but didn't drink it. "I don't think I'm doing this right," he said. I remember wanting to fix it, to offer advice, to steer him towards stability. Instead of asking what he was afraid of, I told him what he should do. He nodded. He always nodded. He left early, said he had somewhere to be. Later, I would realize that somewhere was nowhere in particular. He just didn't feel heard. The next few years blurred. Harold retired at 65. We traveled a little. We babysat grandchildren. I believed we were building memories, but there was a thin distance forming with Michael. Phone calls shorter, visits less frequent. I noticed. I did not interrupt it. "Give him space," Harold would say. So I did. Space can become an ocean. When Michael finally told us he was moving across the country for work, I pretended to be supportive. I hugged him, told him it was an adventure. Inside, I felt something tearing. At the airport, I almost said, "Stay." I almost said, "I'm sorry if I haven't listened." I almost said, "You matter more than your direction." I said none of it. Do you know how many of life's turning points are shaped by the sentences we swallow? Michael and I never fought. There was no explosion, no dramatic exit, just gradual thinning. Time did what time does. It widened the gap gently, politely, until it felt normal. And that is the most dangerous kind of loss, the kind you adjust to. Years later, I would wish for that quiet kitchen table conversation again. I would replay it at 3 a.m, rewriting my responses. But by then, the distance would no longer be measured in miles. It would be measured in missed chances. And just as I began to sense how fragile everything was, Harold collapsed on a Tuesday afternoon. The phone call came from a hardware store. Harold had gone to buy screws for a loose cabinet hinge. It was such an ordinary errand. I was making a grocery list when the stranger's voice asked if I was his wife. He said the word collapsed. By the time I reached the hospital, there were too many quiet faces in the hallway. We had been married 63 years. I always believed we had more conversations ahead of us, more evenings on the porch, more arguments about nothing. His last words to me that morning were, "I'll be back before lunch." We never discussed what would happen if one of us didn't come back. At the funeral, people told me he'd lived a good long life, 90 years old. A blessing. Length does not soften absence. The house became an echo chamber. Every room held a version of him. His reading glasses on the nightstand. His coat still hanging by the door. Grief at 90 feels different than grief at 30. It is heavier, quieter. There are fewer people left who remember the beginning of your story. Daniel tried to call every evening. Rebecca visited when she could. Michael flew in, and for a brief moment, we were all together again. I almost told him then. I almost apologized for the years of half listening, for mistaking guidance for love. But the house was full of sorrow. It didn't feel like the right time. Not now. Not in the middle of funeral arrangements. Not while everyone was fragile. After everyone left, silence moved in permanently. I began to understand something terrible. The assumption of time had shaped every major regret in my life. I assumed I had more time with my mother, more time with my father, more time to repair distance with my son, more time with my husband. I was wrong every time. Have you ever postponed a conversation because it felt uncomfortable? What if discomfort is the doorway? Months after Harold's death, I suffered a minor stroke. The doctors said I was lucky. I lost some strength in my left hand. nothing dramatic. But lying in that hospital bed alone at 91, I felt the full weight of my postponements. If I had died that week, what would have remained unsaid? That question changed everything. But change at 91 is not the same as change at 40. By then, the window is narrower, and some doors do not reopen. Recovery forced stillness on me. I moved in with Rebecca for a while. Losing independence is its own kind of mourning. I had always been the capable one, the organizer, the steady voice. Now I needed help tying my shoes. In quiet afternoons, I began writing letters. Not formal letters, not dramatic ones. Just honest sentences I had delayed for decades. To Daniel, I wrote, "I am proud of you, but I wish I had said it more when you doubted yourself." To Rebecca, "Thank you for your patience with me. I know I was not always gentle." To Michael, I wrote the longest letter of all. "I am sorry I tried to shape you instead of understand you." I did not know how he would receive it. We had learned to speak safely over the years, birthdays, holidays, polite updates. When he called after reading it, there was a long silence. Then he said, "I always thought you were disappointed in me." My chest tightened. That had never been my intention. Intentions do not erase impact. We talked for an hour, not about careers or plans, about fears, about loneliness, about the pressure he felt to be steady when he wasn't. For the first time in decades, I listened without preparing a solution. It felt like standing in sunlight after years indoors. But even in that moment of repair, I understood something painful. Reconciliation late in life is beautiful. It is also limited. There are years we will never reclaim. Versions of him I never fully met. Versions of me he never fully knew. Awareness in old age is sharp. You see patterns clearly. You recognize where you hid behind busyness, where you avoided vulnerability. If you are watching this and you are younger than I am, ask yourself quietly, who believes you are disappointed in them? Who is waiting for you to say something simple and overdue? Do not assume they know. I used to believe love was obvious. It is not. It requires articulation, repetition, courage. At 92, my world is smaller. My body is slower, but my clarity is fierce. I cannot change my past, but I can tell you what it cost me to misunderstand time. And that brings me to the final truth. If I could condense 92 years into one sentence, it would be this. Time does not announce its departures. It leaves quietly while you are planning something else. The greatest mistake of my life was not failure. It was assumption. I assumed there would be another Sunday dinner, another airport goodbye, another ordinary Tuesday. Ordinary days are not placeholders. They are the main event. I wish I had learned that in my 50s. I wish I had understood in my 60s that preparation for old age is not just financial, it is relational, it is emotional. It is the discipline of not saying later to what matters. You cannot control how long you live. I have learned that in ways I would not wish on you. But you can control whether your love is expressed now or postponed. If you take anything from my story, let it be this. Make the call, ask the question. Sit at the kitchen table a little longer. Listen without correcting. Say the sentence that scares you, not dramatically, not perfectly, just honestly, because one day, whether at 70 or 92, you will sit in a quiet room and review your life not by achievements, but by conversations. And you will not be haunted by the things you said, only by the things you postponed. If someone came to mind while you were listening, someone you have not called, someone you need to forgive, someone you need to thank, do not wait for the right moment. This is the right moment. I am 92 years old, and if I have any authority left, it is this. Do not assume you have time. I did. And that misunderstanding shaped everything.